Hello and welcome to this video on the retraction of academic work that has been published in peer-reviewed journals. Retraction is the last port of call for academic misconduct, fraud, or other misdemeanors. It is a means to completely remove an article from the academic record. That means no readers, citations, or impact. That is a significant occurrence and comes only after protracted effort by journals and other academics to correct the problematic article. Retractions have gone from under 100 a year before the turn of the century to more than 1,000 a year. This includes honest errors, duplicate prints of an article, and bad actors. The severity of this action cannot be underestimated. Retractions not just withdraw the article from circulations, but carry a mark of shame in most cases. The mark sticks with an academic throughout their career. There are some academics who take the root cause of most retractions, fraud, very seriously. They actively observe publications for such deception. They then kickstart the process. Articles that exist in the scientific literature that have, or should have been retracted, have an adverse effect on meta-studies. They tend to confound results, and this can cause a more favorable shift towards the observed effect, even when none should have been found. Let's start with the leading causes of retraction: fraud, replicated or modified images, and methodological flaws. Of these, the first two are a sign of something far more serious. While the latter is more understandable, it is also more of a problem. Fraud is not just misrepresentation of your findings. In some cases, a researcher may make up results from thin air. This can be true of purported large studies conducted in a short time. In other cases, it can be a matter of non-existent ethics approvals, or approvals that have been misused or inappropriately issued. Image modification is exactly what it says on the tin. Some academics can and have taken results from their current research and simply rotated or moved parts of the picture. Others have taken images from the same article and put them in the article at a later point. This repeats the image, but makes different and often contradictory claims about the contents. Finally, methods. Not all studies are made equal. Not all methods are the same, and often the hierarchy follows a certain standard. Even with that in mind, not all studies are going to fit into the hierarchy, and you cannot use the best practices for all experiments. This is why a good mentor is needed to guide those who are not familiar through the process and explain why a less robust method is better, even if it is less well placed in the design pyramid. This might all seem a bit convoluted, so before we look at retractions proper, consider these examples of each kind of misconduct. Recently, there was a very high-profile case coming out of the Karolinska Institute involving the biologist Paolo Macchiarini. He is said to have falsified results, failed to get ethics approvals, and continued to conduct experimental treatments that had been shown to have limited to no benefit. This horror show of misconduct was culminated by a report that summarized how his misconduct was published. The big caveat to some of his work was a failure to inform readers of the complications and deaths arising from his procedures. This misconduct had more fallout as Macchiarini's articles had co-authors who also fell under the same shadow of misconduct. These 6 articles were retracted. Before explaining how that happens, we still need to look at the image manipulation and methodological flaws. Modified images are not common, but neither are they rare. Whether it is Bigfoot or Loch Ness, doctored images can be found everywhere. It is when they show up in academic work that eyebrows are raised. An ironic example of this involves Cao Zhuotao, the Chinese fraud Tsar as he is known. This is the man who told Chinese researchers to hold themselves to a higher standard and then would punish them if they did not. He is the Chief Research Integrity Officer for all of China's research. Someone like this is unlikely to make friends, and his body of work has been heavily scrutinized. There have been a number of images and charts found that appear to either be repetitions or manipulations. These were found in dozens of articles, and they were retracted. Now it's thought that as he wears many hats, being in charge of multiple laboratories, is in charge of a university, and has his responsibilities as integrity officer, he hands a lot of this responsibility off to his postdoctoral research fellows or to graduate students, and they are the ones who are likely to have given him false data that was then incorporated into these articles in an effort to ingratiate themselves with what they believe to be extremely good results that he would want to see, even if they're not real. This leads into the final methodological flaws. We can rely on one simple but controversial example of this, Seralini. He was trying to prove that glyphosate causes harm using an animal model. An animal model is normally the gold standard, but not if you use the wrong animal or breed. That is the case here. His rats were always going to develop tumors, and so when he ran the experiment for the several years that he did, the results were always going to come back positive for his theory, but that was not supported by the method. As with the other examples so far, Seralini had his work retracted, but unlike the others, it was later republished in another journal. Now that you've seen these three cases of what is needed for retraction, how does it happen? It starts with someone seeing the problem. It could be a surprisingly familiar picture, as Elizabeth Bick has a knack for finding, or, as is the case with Macchiarini, a whistleblower who could come forward about the fraud. In other cases, a mounting body of questions and contrary evidence like Seralini. In rare instances, a researcher may identify serious flaws in their own work, wherein they contact the journal directly themselves. The escalation is done in several ways. It begins with some sort of proof, and the simplest but most compelling is to have an overlay with the image that is fraudulent and what you believe is the original or true source. If the two match, it would be extremely compelling. More difficult and generally requiring replication studies are methodological flaws that show the conclusions reached were not sound. The last example we gave of misrepresented statistics and similar is a little harder and often requires both investigation and statistical know-how. This lets an observant reader figure out how the results line up, or in this case, do not line up. This is then brought to the attention of the lead author or corresponding author, who can either accept or refuse the concerns. Either way, the next step occurs. The editor of the journal is made aware of the problems. Either the author or a fellow researcher brings this to them and explains the problem. The editor then goes back to the author with the concerns and seeks further information to explain them. Alternatively, the author goes to the editor and explains themselves preemptively. These actions either satisfy the author and the editor or not. If it does satisfy the editor, the article stands and nothing more happens, except for a possible letter to the editor outlining the other researcher's concerns. If it does not pass the editor, then they may request further evidence to be reviewed by another expert. This can include original data or images. If these are provided, then they are reviewed. If not provided, then that tends to be damning and gets an article pulled, as no evidence to support the work is presented, and many questions are raised. If the evidence is less certain, corrections or errata may be made. This is assessed and implemented on an ad hoc and case-by-case basis. If it is more serious, then the article may be retracted, but this is done with either the agreement or the authors or at the discretion of the journal, but also with great reticence. One-sided retractions are not desirable, and only done when the authors will not recognize, accept, or justify an answer to the faults found. This whole process is a lesson in being cautious in what is published, looking at it and questioning it, taking it with skepticism and critical thought. At the same time, we need to push for some information quickly today, and with so little knowledge about the virus which shall not be named, that's getting harder, and we may find information coming out now has been methodologically flawed, is fraudulent, or is somehow or other not correct. This video has also ignored the leading cause of retractions, plagiarism, but that is a whole different beast that needs to be looked at in detail by itself. There is one interesting trend about this whole area, and that is researchers who own up to their own mistakes may not always win, but they are less harshly punished by the scientific community than those who hide or fail to recognize their conduct. And so it's worth remembering that if you do make a mistake, to step up, admit to it, and fix it. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting or useful, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.